Hello and good morning. I want to just thank everyone for inviting me here. It's really great to be here. It's my first time in Bosnia, and it seems like a really beautiful city. I can't get over this, how wonderful the food smells. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah. So I'd like to start off just by getting a sense of what experience you have with using visualization techniques. So maybe if you can just shout out some things, like some sort of visualization techniques maybe that you're using at your office, in your home, your school, wherever you are. A scrum board. Sketching. Nice. Timelines. Yeah? Graphs. That's a good one. Most of us use graphs, I'm sure. Anyone else? Any of you using story mapping, journey mapping? Yeah? I see a hand at the back. A few heads nodding. That's good. I was worried I might be talking about something that people don't really use that much, but yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how we use visualization at Spotify, and how I think it helps us to make sense of our environment, which is constantly changing and so on. So, how many of you know where this is? I'm hearing one Cape Town over here. I'm seeing a hand. Anyone been here? A couple of hands. If I ask again, how many of you have been here? Yeah? 3, 4, 5 people. Cool. So this is the city that I consider, outside of Stockholm, it would, like if I left there, this would be my home. It's not the city I was born in, but it's a city I really like. And what I like about this picture is that whenever I see it, it really it conjures up all of this emotion and feeling. I can think about the history of, there's a little place just over here where I went to my Scrum Master training course. There's a company in the city center over there where I started working and using Scrum for the first time. There's the view from the top of the mountain at the back there that's really, really amazing. And I think about all of the journey and the experience that I've had, and all of that comes just from this simple picture, which I think is quite amazing. The other thing that's nice about this is that I also met my fiancée here, which is something I'm pretty pleased about. And she's at least 10% more beautiful than that picture. So you might be wondering, why am I talking to you about pictures? So my theory is that pictures work like vacation photos and so on. This is not a picture that I took myself, obviously. I'm not that good a photographer. But pictures really have this ability to be able to convey a huge amount of information in such a tiny amount of time. And I think that's one of the things that is often overlooked about visualization, about visual tools. So how does this connect to the work that we do? So we work with knowledge. How many of you work with knowledge? Eventually I'll get a question where I get all the hands. How many of you work with knowledge? Yeah? If you build software or you do anything where you're, yeah? So what do we know about knowledge? Where does knowledge sit? Who can point to knowledge for me? Where is it? It's here. Where else is it? Where else is it? Yeah? What else is happening to knowledge? Aside from being inside somebody's head and therefore quite invisible, where does knowledge, what happens to knowledge? You're born with one set of knowledge and it stays the same for your whole life. No? It changes. Grows when it's shared, and it changes. So this is something that I think is really, really interesting. So we're working with knowledge, with something that people often overlook, and we're working in a complex environment because it's constantly changing. New things are happening. People have emotions and feelings. Sometimes they share something, sometimes they don't. You never really know why, and you can't always make sense of this. So you might be thinking, well, if it's constantly changing and everything, maybe we're a little bit screwed, right? As Grumpy Cat says, there's 2 things I don't like: change and the way things are. It's a bit of a tough situation to be in, right? What do you do about this? So I think that this presents us an opportunity, right? For companies that basically can figure out how to work in this sort of realities of the way that we're working, we can learn basically to learn faster than other organizations or other companies, other societies, other people. Does this sound, am I making sense? Yeah? Do a show of hands again, see if we can get all the hands in the room. Does this make sense? Yeah? Cool. I'm going to make you all stand up if I don't get enough hands. Do a little dance or something. I have a coworker at Spotify she's an absolute fan of making people embarrassed. She thinks that getting people outside of their comfort zone is fantastic. So she has this little thing called the rocket that she makes us do whenever we do offsites and stuff. Basically, you start low down like this and you go, ooh, and then you, wah, like as you reach the top. I don't know if you ever tried to do it with a room full of people who don't really know each other so well. It's kind of awkward. So I'm warning you and politely threatening that I may make you do it. Cool. So as I say, presents an opportunity. Working in this environment, we've got all kinds of things going on. So how, right? So as we said, the knowledge is distributed around. It's inside people's heads. We have different ideas, different perspectives, different types of language that we use to talk about things. How many of you work in a company where you have more than 3 words for some same concept? It's exactly the same thing, but you call it 3 different things. Ever had that? I've never worked. No, of course I have. Every company I've worked in has like even more than 3. You know? It's a team, it's a squad, it's a group, it's a friendship, it's a circle, it's the same thing. Adds a whole layer of extra complexity. So if we're saying that no single person can see the entire system, I mean, I don't think that I know everything that's going on Spotify. I don't think there's a single person in that organization that has a handle on everything. Whether that's the entire organization, whether that's the strategic plan, whether that's the detail of what the teams are doing. Even within a team, I think it would be pretty hard for anyone to have a clear picture of everything that's going on. So what we're really trying to do here is bring people together to share knowledge and build a coherent picture, combining all of these different perspectives together. Yeah? So this is my thesis. There are three things that I think visualization can help us with, and I'm going to talk to you about them in a little bit more detail today. I think it helps us to identify the opportunities and the differences in our perspectives, to combine them, bring them together to build a more coherent picture of our world, and to remind us. It's a visual stimulator, like that picture that I showed you at the beginning. Every time I think about it, reminds me, where was I? What was I doing? Cool. So let's get started. So if we talk about identify, right? As I say, identify the opportunities, see what it is. What things don't we understand? Maybe what things are the opportunities? Try to build a more complete picture. I don't know how many times you've been in a meeting where somebody's saying, like, I think we should do this thing. Like, why do you think we should do this thing? Well, I have this bunch of information that says we should go this way. Somebody else sitting right next to them on the same team works with them all day. I think we should do that thing. I've got this set of information, reinforces this idea. Imagine if you can do that and bring those 2 perspectives together. I had an example. I don't have something, but let me do it with this. So if I hold up this phone, right? And if I say to you, let's say if I put the phone over here, you see one perspective of this phone, right? And you describe it back to me. It looks silver. It's got an Apple logo on the back. I look at it from this side. I see a black device. It's exactly the same thing. We're just looking at it from different perspectives, right? No one single variation of that story is exactly the same or perfectly complete. Now, I don't say that to say that we can build a perfectly complete picture, because I don't think we can, but we can try to make it more coherent with the world. If your data says this and you're going in that direction, and turns out you were wrong, it's not very helpful. You want to try to have a more complete picture. So let me give you a couple of examples. So this is a team that I didn't work directly with this team, but I was working right next to them, and I spent a lot of time talking to the leader in this area. He came up with this idea. This team basically built some of our deployment tooling. It's a build system. And a bunch of engineers were saying, guys, it takes so long. Like when I do a push, and all of a sudden it's days before I know what's actually going on. Like people just saying, building is so slow, getting feedback is so slow. Even at Spotify, we have problems. So what did they do? They sat down and they said, let's build a picture and try to understand what's happening, right? So over here on the left, basically it says here, I think it says assigned task in Jira, or assigned story at stand-up. That's what it says, sorry. Assigned story at stand-up. And on the other side is live in production. And they mapped out the whole flow. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, what happened? Okay, so I open a Jira ticket maybe, or I go talk to somebody, I figure out what the problem is, work through it. Everybody was convinced before they started this that the problem was not enough tin, basically. We didn't have enough stuff in the data center. It wasn't powerful enough. Build queues were too long, build times were too long, all of this kind of stuff. They spent probably about a day or 2 poking around, talking to different stakeholders, showing them this thing, bringing in different engineers saying, tell us what happens here, what happens next, what happens next. Turns out, just before that first blue sticky in the middle there, is a step called code review. And we had, for some reason, we had 3 different code review systems at the time. And some of the engineers had turned off notifications from the ones that they didn't care about. So if I wrote code in the one, and you wrote code in the other, we weren't getting each other's notifications when I asked you to peer review my code. Simple fix, right? Changed it straight away. Then it turned out that it was really hard to pass this information, like make sense of what do I need to do with this code review. So instead of throwing more tin at the situation, they were able to identify what the actual problem was and solve it in a different way. And they wouldn't have been able to do this without bringing those different perspectives together. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about ambiguous value, the sort of idea of we should go this way, we should go that way. I'm going to have to kind of just draw it with the pointer, but if you imagine, how many of you have been in a conversation like that one that I described? Somebody says we should go this way, somebody else says we should go this way. How do you deal with that? You ever been in a situation like this? Yeah, there we go, we don't have to do the rocket. So I noticed this pattern happening with one of the groups that I was working with, constantly saying, you say we should go this way, you say we should go the other way, you say we should go this way. We end up in this circular conversation. Went over to the whiteboard, drew a simple 2-axis thing on the board, said this side is value, this side is urgency. Stick it, just take a guess. Throw all the post-its, everything that you've done in your planning, throw it up on the wall and let's see what happens, right? So if you imagine basically an axis like this. Up in the top right here are the things that are the most urgent and most valuable. There were only 3 things that landed up in that space, and we'd been talking about 15 different items. Suddenly, just by visualizing it, we were able to say, hey, what's going on here? The other thing that we noticed was that we were actually in agreement about all of them except for one. What happened was somebody put it up in the one here, and then somebody else said, no, that's not right, and moved it here. Somebody else said, no, that's not right, and moved it up there again. That's the one we need to talk about. We're already in agreement about the other stuff. We just didn't realize it. Simple but powerful technique just to show how, like, you don't need to have some conversations about all of this stuff and to focus the discussion on what's important. So these two kind of blend into each other. It's partly identifying, it's partly combining. And what I think is particularly interesting, like this team that I was working on that was doing that discussion, there were about 8 different nationalities represented, 4 different continents. It's a fairly diverse team. I don't know if you've noticed the thing about diverse teams, but if I say here in Bosnia, if I say we're going to do something next Friday, when do I mean? Do I mean this coming Friday? The very, very next Friday? Or do I mean the one afterwards? This immediate next one. See, where I come from, next Friday means the one after this next coming Friday. I don't know why. I have no idea. Language is a funny thing. It has meaning that you infer, right? So this is just a simple example of how that kind of things happen. Another one of that is like, you say 9:30 or 9:30? 9:30? Is that halfway to 10? Or is, yeah? You familiar with the example? You've encountered it before. So you say it differently between, wow, that must be fun, yeah. So we have that kind of stuff all the time, and a large amount of this is trying to take the thing out of just the conversation and the talking and represent it in a way that we can make sense of, that's a little bit easier to work with. So as I said, diverse perspectives, bringing them together, combining them into something, we can get that increased coherence, so a better description like the phone that I showed you earlier, right? This is an example that I like. So this is a retrospective timeline. Yeah, I think most of you, somebody was shouting about timelines at the back. Basically what we did here was we put up a bunch of things. Essentially, time starts, this is another one of the differences. So in the Western world, time starts here and goes this way. Yeah, not every culture does it that way, some go the other way. Sometimes you read left and right. Did you know that in China, red is considered positive and green is negative? Yeah? It's really fascinating. So you go in and like, the graph is red, the stock market's crashing. No, it's not, it's going up. So we're busy doing this retrospective. Time on the left, basically, when we started out with the project. Time on the end is where we finished, right? Stick the post-its along the line. And suddenly somebody said to me, hey, actually, not all of these things are positive, not all of them are negative. It's just a bunch of key events that happened. The suggestion was made, maybe what we should do is we should move lower down as negative and higher up as positive, and let's see what happens in the data. One of the engineers walks over and starts drawing this nice thick line over here and suddenly says, hey, you know, we're actually pretty happy right now. There's a lot of really good stuff happening. Like the future's looking really, really bright. Before, we were stuck on these things. Turned out that one or two of these here were actually still problems. All we did was we went and fixed those. And now the vast majority of the team is actually up here in this sort of a state there. Just a simple way to visualize the thing, and they actually came to a realization of their own accord. It wasn't even me pointing it out or anything. Suddenly like, hey. Who of you have only one person in your company? Anybody? One hand. You are so lucky, dude. So in the middle there we have one team that I was working with, and we kept having these conversations about, there's all these people who want to ask us for things, like they changed something. This team happens to build some data infrastructure, so it's essentially a giant database, collects all the stuff that happens on Spotify and people can make sense of it. We were like, okay, so who are the teams that are talking about these things? Oh, that team, and they're always frustrated with us. Well, why are they always frustrated with us? Well, we never talk to them. I wonder if there's any other teams like that. We started sticking down some post-it notes, again, bringing the different teams' perspectives together. Which are the teams that we work with? How closely do we work with them, based on the proximity to the center? And then these colored lines, I don't know if you can see them on the slide, but there's a couple, there's a helpful key over there, but basically the coloring indicates the quality of the relationship. So they're really close, but it might be a really frustrating or angry relationship. It could be really far away, we don't work with them that often, but also a really strong relationship. Something that I found fascinating was there was this team here. One guy walked past and he was like, hey, you don't have Unishark on the board. We were like, who the hell's that? We never heard of this team. Yeah, they're using your stuff all the time. They built this cool feature over there. We had no idea. In some ways, maybe that's a good thing that teams can actually use our infrastructure without having to actually even know about us. But when we're building stuff that's trying to satisfy their needs and we didn't even know they exist, that's a little bit of a challenge. So by drawing this picture, we started to have a conversation about, okay, these people we need to go and work on the relationship with. These people, actually, things are fine. We don't need to worry about it. We have a really good, strong relationship. So we took a much more sort of strategic approach to our relationship development, which was enormously beneficial for this team. So then we have the reminding. How many of you you arrive at work or you wake up in the morning and you have literally one thing to do in the day? I'm not going to force you to do the rocket for that one. I didn't expect any hands. One person kind of half raised a hand. I'm wondering if you're cheating or... Can I come work at your company? So you don't work on one thing. You have a multitude of things to do, right? You remember this picture? Yeah? What I like about this picture, like I said, it's a vacation photo. It reminds you of a place and a time. So when you go into that planning meeting and you map out, like, we're going to do this thing, and then we're going to do that thing, and then this thing is dependent on that thing, and for this one we need that person, and we need to talk to this person as well and make sure that they're on board. When you come back to it, tomorrow, a week from now, a few days from now, suddenly you look at it and you're like, shoo. Maybe not instantly, but much more quickly. The alternative to this may be reading a document or having the whole conversation again. It also works if you've got somebody who's never worked with this before. Bring somebody new into your organization and you say, hey, come look at this. This is how our system is structured. These are the things we're working on. These are the people we work with. Why are those people red? Oh, well, we don't like them so much, so we don't talk to them that often. Maybe you should do that. So it's a really, really, really strong reminder. Sometimes they remind you of the conversations that you had, the diverse perspectives that you brought together. This is me preparing my talk, so sometimes they remind you also of the decisions you made and your thinking. Yes, I was drinking while I prepared the talk. No, it wasn't yesterday. No, I've actually done this talk a couple of times before, but basically what this was is essentially I've just laid it out here. So I want to draw attention to one simple visualization technique here. You see I turned one post-it sideways, makes it stick out from the crowd. Yeah? These are basically the themes, so that's identify. It was originally called decide. I changed it because after the first time I did it, I iterated because I thought it needed improvement. And remind. Introduction, topics about each of the concepts, and the closing. Over the course of a couple of weeks, I could come back to this, sit down at my table in my lounge and go, get a new beer, of course, sit down at my table and go, that's where I was. Very quickly able to move things around. Really, really helpful. Sometimes they just remind you to have fun or that you work with really interesting people. This is one of our values at Spotify. We have it up on the wall, and if you can't read it at the back, you should come sit over here. No, if you can't read it, it says think it, build it, ship it, and it normally says tweak it, but today it says twerk it. Every time that post-it gets cleared away, somebody puts it back. I think it's amazing. Sometimes it just reminds you that you work with people that have a really great sense of humor. You'll find things like this lying around at Spotify. Basically, if you can't see it, sorry, it's a little bit funny, but it says problem, coffee, input into an engineer, the output is a solution, and the side effect is sarcasm. So let me give you some sort of tips that I've picked up over time if you're thinking about using visualization, right? I think that what you're trying to do is you're really trying to radiate information into your organization, right? You're trying to radiate it out to other people. And if you want to do that, you need it to be big. If you think instead of this painting, if I used a little thumbnail, right? How many of you are going to actually see it and pay attention to it, right? It's one of the things that I find a little bit challenging about some of the tooling that we use is that we don't project it in a giant way. Use a Jira board or something, and not to bash Jira, I think there's a lot of power in it, but you have to scroll around to see the whole picture. So we're talking about this little piece and we kind of zoomed in and we're focused. We end up locally optimizing or focusing only on a tiny piece of the situation. We want to be able to see the whole picture. Something else that I see people do a lot is they go into a meeting and you do like a planning session, you create this big, beautiful visualization, and then what do? Turn it into a Word doc or a Google doc, throw away the post-it notes. It's not persistent. So you don't get the benefit of that reminder. You don't get to like sit at it tomorrow and go, that's where we were, right? And if it's not reusable, you won't change it easily, right? I think that's really important. Something about visualization is I often hear people, especially when they're designing like a Scrum board or a Kanban board or something, they're like, we don't know about all the things, like we got to get it just right before we ship it. That's the old way of thinking. We don't do things in big bangs. We evolve, we iterate over them, we try to like figure it out as we go along. Start with something, whatever it is. Start with the idea you have. Take it, show it to a couple of people. Is this what we're working with? Is this what our system looks like? Are these the things that are important? And they can look at it and go, no, actually you missed this thing. Cool, add it in. Do another loop. That's what we talk about when we mean iteration. Let it evolve into something that is meaningful. One more point on this is that very often I see people, especially when they do workflow visualization, is they start with something and they say, this is how we want our process to be. I'm like, what are you're doing? You're trying to represent the way things are. If you want to work with the real world, you have to visualize the way things are, not the way you want them to be. Have the conversation and make the change to your process or your mechanism of working, and then change the board when you actually change your way of working. Try not to do it the other way around, because then you start to hide a lot of the reality of what's happening. If you have loads of bugs, put them up on the board. If you have no bugs, then don't put them on the board. Don't pretend like these things don't exist. Try to visualize it. So now, how many of you remember this picture? Who can tell me where it is? Yeah? Where in South Africa? South. There's a handy clue in the name there. So this is Cape Town. And like I say, I think that using visualization, using techniques like this, have the opportunity to convey enormous amounts of information in an incredibly short space of time. And in doing that, and in creating these artifacts and building them, it allows us to bring together and identify the opportunities in multiple different perspectives, combine them together to make something that's more coherent and a much more clear picture of the world, and then to remind us about it as we continue our day and context switch in and out of the different work that we do. Thank you. Yeah. Always wanted to do like your hometown. That's awesome. This is really cool.
Like the one you had.
Yeah.
It's like all the emotions and everything.
Every time I see it, I will remember this talk. Thank you. Cool. Any questions? I have a hand. Andy at the back, what's up?
Get up. Get up. I mean, I know some of the answers to this, but have you got books that you recommend for people for visualization, user story mapping, kind of things that they can take away?
So you're asking, it's a bit loud. Top three books or suggestions. Cool. For reference. Sure. I'm trying to think. So I would recommend a couple of people specifically. So Jeff Patton, for example, with user story mapping, fantastic book published not too long ago. Really great way of building a visualization. It's kind of a combined roadmap, backlog, and kind of thinking process as well. That would probably be the main one that I would recommend. I would also say there's a couple of interesting blog posts by a guy by the name of Håkan Fors. I sound like I've got something in my throat when I say that. Håkan is based in Stockholm in Sweden, and he does a lot of visualization using like Lego and all kinds of things around that. I would say that those are probably the two main ones. Otherwise, I would say just try stuff out, draw pictures. There's a really great example that I've used before. I did some consulting work before I came to Spotify, and I was talking to someone who kept saying, yeah, I have this problem where the teams are just not really working together. So as he was talking, I started drawing these circles, saying, okay, so how many people in the team? Oh, there's like 8 here, okay, cool. Draw a circle around the people that work together in different groups. Pretty soon it ends up as this mesh of spaghetti. He's like, why will they not work together? I said, well, you've got all these forces, like, it's just obvious to him, these forces pulling people in 100 different directions. Simple sketch like that paints the picture, shows him what's actually there. I didn't really even have to point anything out. It was just like, oh, okay, obvious, I can see what's going on here. So draw pictures, use your hand. So the second reference or third reference would be yourself, I guess. Yeah?
You mentioned the evolution and the reusability of what you do.
Yes.
So theoretically, if I have these post-its, and if I take a picture of that, so I do not transform it into Word or whatever, and I have this picture, but then the picture is static. Is there any software? Has anybody thought of kind of making post-its that you can...
There are things. So I was at a conference the other day, and the keynote speaker was talking about, somebody asked him, why do we use physical tooling, like at his company? They were very adamant about it. And he did two things. He picked up a piece of paper and he moved his fingers on it like this, and it makes a sound. And that sound adds to the auditory experience. Like you experience, you think, I'm in planning, I'm thinking about paper. Like it's something really quite like emotional, and you sort of attach to it. The other one was he put the piece of paper in his mouth and he said, can you taste it? Like, you know what paper tastes like? He's like, I have no idea why people do that, but everybody knows what paper tastes like. We've all tried it. There's something like sort of psychologically different about working with a physical thing. I made this thing with my hand, I interacted with it. It's very different, like you sort of abstract a layer away from it. And what we're really trying to do is connect people and the work and the customers together. And if we're doing this in a way that is sort of too removed and too abstracted away, I think we lose some of it. So to answer your question, I think there are some tools that you can use, but I would say unless you have a really, really good reason to use a tool, so if you're distributed and can't afford flights, then maybe do that. But otherwise...
I didn't mean it in the first place, but in terms of reusing, let's say, for example, when you have this picture of this kind of what is positive and negative, and then theoretically, a year later, you take that picture and say, where do we stand today?
Yeah.
So you basically have to rebuild it, right?
No, so in that situation, I would probably just keep the picture. I take photos of all the visualizations we use. If it's going to be something that you're going to build on, then maybe keep it in a physical form. So like with the user story mapping that I mentioned in answer to Andy's question, build it, keep it, next time you do planning, iterate on it, update it, tweak it, that sort of thing. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Cool. More questions? Yes? I don't have a good answer for you, but what I can suggest is there's a Twitter account called Spotify Cares, and if all of you and all your friends shouted at them and said, why is Spotify not in Bosnia? Maybe someone upstairs will be like, oops, we better get on that. I have the same thing. I mean, I come from South Africa and we haven't launched there yet either, and every couple of weeks I get a message on Facebook or something, friends like, what are you doing, dude? Stop slacking. Bring Spotify. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you than that. Cool. If there's no more questions, I'm happy to talk to people. I don't bite. I love talking to new people. So grab me during the afternoon over a coffee or over lunch. I'll be around all day. Thank you.